So I'm Joshua Mata. I wear many hats at CloudFlare. I'd be glad to show you them and talk to you about them after the panel. But far more interesting are the distinguished panelists to my right. Joining us is Nicole Wong, who was formerly the Deputy Chief Technology Officer of the United States. As the Deputy CTO, Nicole focused on internet privacy and innovation policy. Prior to joining the Obama administration, she was the legal director for products at Twitter and was Google's Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for Product and Regulatory Matters from 2004 to 2011. Nicole is a frequent speaker and author on a number of issues related to law and technology, including 5 appearances before the US Congress regarding internet policy, and we're delighted to have Nicole with us today. Also joining us is Cindy Cohen, who is the Executive Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or the EFF. In her 15-year tenure at the EFF, Cindy has served as the legal director as well as its general counsel, taking on numerous issues ranging from export control to electronic voting, copyright protection, and online identity. She's currently deeply involved in the issues of privacy and surveillance, both domestically and internationally, as well as reform of the Computer Fraud Abuse Act. According to the National Law Journal, and I quote, "If Big Brother is watching, he better look out for Cindy Cohen." So thank you, Cindy, very much for joining us here today as well.
Love that quote.
So to kick us off, in my role at Cloudflare, I actually spend a decent time in DC. I won't say too much. And it strikes me that there are really 2 Washingtons. There's the Washington that doesn't understand technology, and there's the Washington that does understand technology. I'm very likely oversimplifying it, but do you find that accurate? And how do you think that dichotomy frames the relationship between the Beltway and Silicon Valley?
So I'll kick off. First of all, happy birthday, Cloudflare. I think I could sing that without a copyright license now, so that's all great. But I'm not going to sing because we don't have enough time. So to go to the 2 Washingtons, I really learned everything I know about the internet here in Silicon Valley. I can tell you, Washington, totally not like that Schoolhouse Rock cartoon about the Bill sitting on Capitol Hill. And I think it has historically been true that there was like the part of Washington that got tech and that didn't get tech, and then there was Silicon Valley. I think that's accurate, but it's changing, and for the better, for a bunch of reasons. One is we're just bringing better people over. The line that you would see between the tech community and the political community is becoming much more porous. So starting with my former boss, Todd Park, who was the CTO at the time, he started the Presidential Innovations Fellow in 2012, and we started with 18 fellows who were taken out of the private sector and brought to make government better with technology. That is now a permanent program at the White House as of an executive order this year. So you have better people. You have the US Digital Services, which is housed in DC to figure out how to make tech better. And by bringing in real people, for example, Megan Smith, who's formerly Google, now our new CTO, my former colleague from both Google and Twitter, Alex McGillivray, DJ Patel from LinkedIn as our first in the history of the country chief data scientist, and a computer scientist like Ed Felton sitting at the White House who could talk circles about cryptography with anyone. That kind of firepower sitting in the West Wing is amazing. And we should take a moment to appreciate that we have that much talent in DC. What does that mean for you as someone who talks policy in DC? It means that you're less often going to get blank stares from people when you describe your business, right? But what it means on the ground there is that when there's a conversation about some of the hard problems we are having about internet governance or surveillance or encryption, there are people who speak accurately and authentically about what's at stake. That means that in the end, I hope, we will have better policy because the conversation, by definition, must be more honest when you have a technologist sitting at the table with you.
I think that's right, and I think the executive branch, especially the White House, has done some great things. I think we really have to talk about Congress, though. where I don't think we have that level of technical expertise on the side that's working to preserve the liberty and the space of the internet. And the thing that's changed from the 1990s, when I started doing this kind of work more seriously, is that there is actually a pretty powerful voice for turning the internet into a surveillance state that is technically savvy. So it's not like there's just blank stares and lack of knowledge if we don't come in and make the case for freedom and understand how the technology works. There is a voice that is on the, let's take the internet and turn it into the largest surveillance mechanism ever built, that is loud, strong, and making their case in Congress and in the executive branch. So we really do need to go. This isn't a conversation where dumb people just will kind of maybe not do the right thing, but not do it because they don't understand things. This is a situation in which there is a conversation happening that, if we're not a part of, is going to go a very different way than the kind of the promise of the internet, which got me interested in doing these things. And the other thing is, while again I'm very happy to see some people in the White House, I think that we need to think about technologists in the room kind of the way some of the research has come around having minorities or women in the room, is if you just have one technologist in the room, they're going to get asked to fix the computers. You need 2 or 3 to be able to change the conversation in ways that are beyond kind of tokenism, beyond just stopping really horrible ideas and actually building good ideas. So we have to invest even more if you want to have an impact on the conversation. And I think the thing that has been nice to see at OSTP in the White House is that, when Nicole went, it was kind of a couple people, and they're growing that. But I think we have to keep Congress in mind, and we have to, maybe convince some technologists that it's okay to spend a little time on the East Coast before you come back home where the weather's better.
Great. Well, so many folks in the audience are tech influencers, founders, tech executives. Nicole, having worked both, on both sides of the fence and talking about the shift of talent in both directions, bidirectionally, and the need, frankly, Cindy, for more people to be in the room, what words of wisdom do you have for how to get involved? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about your personal story.
Oh, go serve. So I had just started at Twitter and got a call like in January of 2013 from the White House, which I literally had to sit down because I've never gotten a call from the White House, and asked me to come and serve. And I don't know if any of you know Todd Park. He is probably one of the most inspirational people I have ever met, and talks passionately about how we can change government to make it better serve the American people. What Todd has actually done is not just talk about it, but create an infrastructure for all of us to go. The Presidential Innovation Fellows program is 6 months to a 12-month tour. U.S. Digital Services can be a 1-year to 2-year tour. There are lots of ways for you to find ways to plug in. And he and I have been talking even now, because we call ourselves the really, really West Wing, now that we've come back to the West Coast, about how we get more people. Like, can we get someone who can take a 3-month sabbatical, but go help build a database for the Veterans Administration so it works better, right? How do we improve the immigration system so that people are not doing everything on COBOL to be able to get a green card, right? Like, so there's lots of room for great technologists to go, and it won't be sexy work, but it will be impactful work. Let me take, for example, healthcare.gov. It's a website. The fact that we almost spent $1 billion on a website is phenomenally crazy. And it took a SWAT team of people and technologists from the private sector to go there and fix it. And they had like really low benchmarks of like, we want to get 7 million people enrolled by the end of the enrollment date, but if you could get 4 to get through the process, that would be awesome. They got 8 by the time March 31st rolled around. That's 8 million people who have never had insurance in their lives. And the letters coming in from the people were people who said, I have a pre-existing condition. Neither me or my children have ever been able to have health care. They had it for the first times in their lives. that will change our society. So even though it's just a website, you can change people's lives by going to serve and finding a way to do it.
We certainly love to find a way to get them on CloudFlare. So I'm sure people here in the building.
We got to fix the IT procurement system as well then.
But I think that when you're talking about government, there's kind of two arguments. There's two levels in which technologists need to be engaged in government. And the first one is the one Nicole's talking about, which is make government systems actually work better. That's important and it's great. It's not where I live. I live in making sure the government making the rules and setting up the processes for the rest of us don't suck, and ensure space for innovation, aren't just captured by the big companies who then use their power with government to try to fence out new horizons. There's a raft of issues there. So both of them are important, and one of the things I think is, we want to, I've got this idea that I haven't been able to pull together yet called Speak Tech to Power, where we really do want to take people who understand about how technology works and teach them how to be advocates in the various situations for policy changes, and not just, people in DC think technologists and they think fix my computer, right? And we need to change that so that while there are plenty of people coming fixing their computers, and at healthcare.gov I'm really happy that they did, that's not the pigeonhole that people need to stay in. People who understand technology need to be able to talk about policy in a way that helps make the rules and the limitations of those rules and the balance something that favors a continued open platform. And to me, what made the internet so awesome is that anybody anywhere in the world can have a microphone to speak to the entire rest of the world, and ideas can catch fire, and people can have private communications and public communications, and they're in control of which that they're having. We do okay on the first one, I think, most of the time. The second one, we got some work to do.
Right. Well,
And I think that the work that Cindy has done for so long, and EFF and so many of the other civil liberties orgs, is, you're totally right, which is it's been a fight just to get at the table, right? And the right table, not the kids' table, but the adults' table, to have a conversation around policy. I think that part of what we should recognize in Silicon Valley, because I think a lot of, particularly at the startup level, because you're busy building your product, but even the more mature companies for a very long time have thought that they could ignore DC. That time is closing. It is closing because they're getting smarter. It is closing because the things that we're doing with technology, from Internet of Things to self-driving cars, head you straight into a regulatory space, and you cannot ignore your regulators in that space. So you have to start exercising the muscle of wanting to be at the table. We will get the policy we deserve if we don't show up. If we cannot sit and think that was a really stupid thing they passed if we haven't bothered to go and tell them why it was stupid.
Right.
Yeah, and you have to do both. I'm sorry, I'm going to.
And I have a question though for you.
Okay.
Because, so many people don't actually know that the EFF has been very instrumental to CloudFlare in actually dealing with these sorts of issues, particularly legal cases and whatnot. It'd be great to hear how the EFF can work with any company in Silicon Valley to really advance our point of view, get the seat at the grown-up table, if you will.
Well, I think that it goes both ways, right? Because I think if we're focused in the same direction, there's all sorts of opportunities for things to do. And in Cloudflare's case, we've actually represented Cloudflare when they got this horrible injunction, because apparently you can't say Groove Shark on the internet, no matter who you are, without getting in trouble. And we were able to help kind of narrow that back down to something a little sane. So we're occasionally, if the issue is one that we also think is important, we will represent companies. In general, companies can afford lawyers, and there's a lot of people who can't, so we focus the other direction. But if the issue is important enough, we will help people. We talk through things with companies. We try to build model policies that are things that people can do, and try to consult. And then when it comes to DC, we try to work together where we can. It's not always the case that we agree with industry on certain things, but where we do, I think it's important that we try to stand together. We view ourselves as fundamentally representing the users, And users and companies often have aligned interests. They have aligned interests in intermediaries being free of liability so that people feel free to be intermediaries, for instance.
Right.
And there's other instances. So we work with companies kind of directly, but we also try to work in broader coalitions. And of course, we're talking about DC a lot, but of course, sometimes you just have to go sue, right? And so, so we also work with companies in terms of presenting technologically, we think technologically important cases to the courts in a way that helps the courts understand them as well. So whether it's through amicus briefs or other kinds of things.
Right. So it'd be great to kind of switch over to some of the issues and maybe trigger the fear impulse a little bit, which is, as many in this audience are all too aware, around the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, SOPA, PIPA, numerous other legislative measures which, have the potential to erode the openness of the internet. I think it's probably not an overstatement to call these scary moments for people in our industry and probably everyone on this stage. Are there still things to fear, and how fearful should we be?
Well, I spend most of my time dealing with mass surveillance, and I think the fact that the NSA is sitting on the internet at core junctures making copies of everything that goes by, and then we have to trust their secret filters to make sure that we're not targeted or unnecessarily swept up in their behavior is a gigantic chilling effect on the kind of internet that we want to build. And I think for me, it's job one, right? The internet needs to be free of, the giant all-watcher sitting at key junctures watching things. And we need to figure out how to have a system that's different than that one. And that one got built largely in secret, and now we know about it. We've got schematics in the New York Times, so I think we can't pretend anymore like we don't know what's going on. And we need to me, that is job one. I don't think you can do a lot of other things. I think every social movement, every political movement, every innovation moment happened because people were able to have a private conversation about how to make the world better. And if you can't have those private conversations without the risk of somebody listening in and having to trust that they just won't misuse that information, then you create a gigantic chilling effect. And that's about social movements, political movements, and I think it's about technological change as well. Right. Trade secrets are important in the Valley.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the U.S. government, right? If you build this infrastructure, then other governments also participate and feel like it's okay to. I think it's important that we create a system that may be violated sometimes, but that there's a general sense of what's okay and what's not okay, so that right-thinking people know how they're supposed to behave. So I think that, to me, that recreating the space for a private conversation in the digital environment is job one. And we've lost that, and we lost it, I think, due to a lot of secrecy and a lot of people not paying attention, a lot of people burying their heads in the sand.
So I think internet policy to me has always been super fun, partly because it is like challenging 7-dimensional chess, right? Because you're dealing with your government, but you're also dealing with every government that knocks on your door, and increasingly those governments are coming. There was a period in like the first 10 years of the internet, right? So the late 90s to mid 2000s, where the internet was largely about penetration into the US, the European Union, Canada, Australia, and Japan, right? And that was great, and we grew a lot of businesses there. But all of those countries, generally speaking, have the same approach as we do about rule of law and free expression and privacy. And what we've seen, certainly I have in the companies I've been at, right, since 2007 or so, the penetration into Middle Eastern countries, into Turkey, into Thailand, into China, into Vietnam, that penetration is going into systems which do not come from the same place with regard to rule of law and privacy and free expression. And we need to figure out how we're going to deal with that. So one of the huge challenges I see coming down the pike in the next several years is how are we going to make this interoperable? Because the promise of the internet, it is that it is free and open and global. And the ability to moderate between all of those different values in all those different countries is becoming much more difficult. I'll add one more thing to be, this is a list of scary. So, so one of the things I worked on when I was at the White House, the president asked for a report on how do we think about big data. Like, A, he was like, what is it? B, like, what policy things should we start to be thinking about? And I think that the masses of data that we are now collecting, both in the private and the public sector, and the mixing of public and private sector data, poses a bunch of challenges for us, not just from privacy, because if you talk to people about what are you worried about your data, they will often say things like, I want to make sure I'm treated fairly. I want to make sure that I have the same opportunities as everybody else. That's not a privacy question. That's actually a fairness question, right? So there is an anti-discrimination issue that is coming up with data. And we don't fully understand or have not fleshed out what it means to ethically use data, what it means to build algorithms that are responsible. Look at VW. What are we supposed to think about how all of these companies are now implementing algorithms across data? And shouldn't you be worried about how that will be done with your financial data, your health data, your Instagram data, whatever it is? Like, there are serious questions to be asked, I think, in the very near term that we aren't really equipped yet.
Right.
We don't have the right people at the table.
Right.
I think that's really important. And I think that in terms of, back to your scary again, I'm sorry, because I think that one of the biggest tools and one of the biggest things that we're spending a lot of time on now is protecting the ability for you to have encryption.
Right.
And it's a very active conversation now. I believe in the White House, the president is trying to formulate his position on this. I think people in Silicon Valley need to speak up, because the inability to lock your own doors will create a very different internet than one where you get to lock your doors and you hold the keys, not somebody else, or your keys aren't spread between 5 different, all of these strategies, right? We all know this is an area where I think what technical people understand, they understand it so well that they don't understand about how important it is to convince other people that, like, you can't have a whatever door you have, back door, front door, or anything, like, you can't build a door that only good guys can use and bad guys cannot use. We say this over and over again in DC, and believe me, all they say back is, well, you just got to try a little harder, geniuses, and figure that out. And I'm like, I believe in innovation, but I also believe in math. And math wins. And so we have to get this message through, because I spent the 90s fighting the crypto wars, and frankly, I'm tired of it. So do it as a favor to me. I don't want to do this all over again.
Well,
we won the last time. Let's just put this thing to bed.
Just because we're running kind of short on time, the one final question I would have, and maybe a brief response. 2016 elections are coming up. Candidates aren't talking a whole lot about the internet, right? What should they be talking about? What are the issues that people in this room should care about? The basis for which we should be backing which candidate? And then we'll open it up to a question or two to the audience. Have to be brief, though.
Well, EFF is a 501c3, so I can't get involved in election. But I think the questions we need to be asking is, what are you going to do about mouse surveillance? Are you going to protect our ability to lock our own doors? And, how are you going to preserve innovation? And it's not happening now. I think I do believe that the Republican primary is in a bit of an echo chamber, where the only thing people are talking about is the stuff that other people are talking about. But I think the rest of us humans need to break into that conversation, so we know what those candidates think, because one of them is going to be the nominee. Mm-hmm. And I think we should be asking the same questions on the Democratic side.
Nicole?
So now that I'm like post-White House, post-company, like I have an amount of liberty I'm not used to.
Please.
Here's the thing, so in the internet space, we largely solve a lot of our own problems, right? And mostly what I hear is, make sure government stays out of the way, is usually what I hear. So when I think about what do I want to hear from the next presidential candidate or president about what their tech agenda looks like, there are a lot of really serious problems that we face as a country, and technology can solve many of them or be a part of that solution. So to me, I would like to hear a candidate tell me, I am going to continue to support all of the innovation happening in our country, but our talent pool is such as that we should be focusing not on apps that let our dogs talk to each other, but we have an infrastructure problem, and we should be using technology to help us build more vibrant, sustainable, and inclusive communities. We have an education problem where we are not doing the right thing by our children. We have a transportation problem, particularly here in the Bay Area, but across our country, about how we get people and goods from one place to another. Technology can solve so many of these issues, and it's kind of like building the website for healthcare.gov. I actually don't think it's magical to be able to fix those solutions. It's about our talent pool being directed in the right place. So to me, what I would like to see a presidential candidate say is that I am recognizing the talent that we have, and I'm going to give them a platform to make sure that they are able to serve in our country.
That's great. Well, we may have time for one question. Lauren has a microphone.
Sorry.
Right here?
Sure, please.
Thank you. What are some practical or realistic ways that you can imagine rethinking rule of law using technology? So things like machine-readable law and smart contracts. Because I know there's a lot of techno-libertarian talk about that in the Bay Area, but what do you see as actually practical for the government?
For a government to institute rule of law? Oh, so there's like a whole constitutional process around that. There are jurisdictions which don't have strong rule of law right now for a whole variety of historical purposes. I'm not actually sure that technology, like handing them a machine-readable constitution, is going to help them with that. To me, it's more of a grassroots issue of helping them understand the significance of what rule of law can do to enable them to move faster to society, to enable technologists to come in and then bring their technology to a society. I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah. So the question is rethinking government and the way technology influences how government works.
Rethinking government. So there is there is work being done now about rethinking government and how we serve the American people, right? So like every agency in the U.S. government has a mission. Increasingly, they are now looking at how can technology be used to advance their mission. It has less to do with rule of law per se, but there are processes that they can make easier using technology.
Great. I think unfortunately we're out of time. We could probably spend all day talking about this, but please a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.